I am recording. And here, people are starting to show up. Wonderful. I wasn't sure how many people would show up with the weather as it is, so I'm glad to see all of you. Hopefully you're all safe and warm. And I'm going to share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started today. Go. For some of you, this won't be new information, but hopefully I can share something that you can either use in your district or just a reawakening of some information you'd forgotten. I'm going to go ahead and share the note taker link with you again. There we go. So welcome to January 2024. As always, we have our community agreements. I found this nice little quote. The whole purpose of education is to turn mirrors into windows. I thought, yeah, that speaks about English learners, exactly. And for today, we are going to I'm going to share a few updates from WIDA, and then we're going to talk about grading and retention a little bit. As always, those are our blueprint to success, and grading kind of fits into all of those, so I didn't really highlight anything specific, but please keep those in mind, and if you ever want to read those, the link is at the bottom of the screen there. And I did link the slide presentation on the note taker, so you can get to these slides and get all of the links from there. Here's a link to our curriculum calendar where you can sign up for the monthly ELD check-ins, as well as anything else that's going on at DESE. These are going to be our topics until May. Next time, we're going to talk about long-term English learners, then refugees and SLIFE students, then CTE. Hopefully, we'll have a representative from our department to help with that presentation. And then in May, we're going to go over hopefully we'll have some updates on the 3-year cycle at that time. All right, and then again, the link to the web page if you do not have that. Getting right into the WIDA updates. Throughout February and March, WIDA is going to be conducting a kindergarten access special study, and they had asked and were recruiting from already identified sites to allow them to come in and interview and do some activities with them. So there's a link here if you're interested in more information on that. And then don't forget about our self-paced modules that are available all the way until the end of the school year. And those are self-paced. You can do them alone, you can do them with a group, but those are all available to you, and those are the topics that are available. There are 2 new topics that have been added. Make sure you're aware of that. And then from OELA, which is the Office of English Language Acquisition, OELA recently took over Title III. So they are now our Title III representative at the federal government. But they have produced some new resources that I wanted to share with you. They're available through this video link, and some really nice things that you can share both with faculty and with parents. And then they also presented a 2-part series on supporting pathways to multilingualism, kind of talking about bilingualism, and the syllabi literacy was a big emphasis on that. And then I came across a really interesting resource, pardon me, that I wanted to share with you. It's migrantliteracynet.com. And this is free to use. It was through a non-for-profit. And teachers can go in and sign up for this as a teacher and prepare a class. And it has various assessments in reading and in math. All of the math assessments have both Spanish and English versions, and they are leveled. My thought with them was it looked like a possible way that we could place students at the beginning of the year when you're enrolling them to see where they are in their math abilities. But I invite you to check it out. I kind of went through it and looked at some of the components and did a couple of the lessons as a student myself and thought it was very well done. The English section or the reading section of it has all English. There are a few Spanish components that you can print off, and there are some parent interaction activities in it built into it as well. Anyway, it's worth a check out. So I wanted to share that with you so you could take a look at it. And then there's a really good article that was put out by Edutopia on how leaders could support English language learners. Doesn't say anything that we as EL teachers don't already know, but it's a good article that you could share with your leadership in your building. So I wanted to share that with you as well. And so we're going to get into grading. So one thing I have to say about grading before I get started is, as a state, we are local control. So all of the different districts within our state have different avenues for grading. Some of them still use A, B, C, D, and F. Some use 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's different from district to district, and we leave it open for districts to decide what their grading policies are, what method they're going to use for grading students, and how they report it. So we don't have a lot of control over that, but there are federal guidelines on grading. And most important is that Lau versus Nichols, which is pretty much the backbone of English language development. And it says that the students are entitled to equal access to the core curriculum, and it has to be made comprehensible. So that's kind of implies about assessment. But then the Office of Civil Rights said that it's a violation of civil rights if the students aren't, if they are retained in any grade for failure to demonstrate basic skills in English. So we can't retain a student because they don't have the language that allows them to access the information in the classroom. That's basically what that civil rights legislation says. So those are our two backbones for grading information that we share out with our schools. So one thing, as having been a former EL teacher, is that I heard quite often from classroom teachers was that they didn't feel that when they did some accommodations or scaffolds, that it was fair for their EL students to get the same grade, like a high grade, that the other students were receiving. And my response was always, that's not the case, because the purpose of accommodations and scaffolding is to level this field for our English learners. So we're helping them to be able to access the same standards and curriculum that everyone else is. So the method that we use should carry with it the same rigor and the same expectations for the student. We're just approaching it in a different way. So just because the student did it differently doesn't mean we can't give them that A for the work that they do. And also important, as it says at the bottom of the screen here, is just because they earned that A doesn't mean we can take away their scaffolds and their supports. They still need those to access the information. So 2 points to keep in mind. Another thing that I want to make sure we understand is that we don't just give English learners grades. We don't look at them and say, well, they tried really hard. I'm going to give them a B for the class because I think that's what they should have. They need to earn the grades that they receive. So we have to have expectations. We have to set goals, and the students have to meet those goals to earn the grades. And some people don't understand that we're actually earning grades. And that whole poor baby, you know, they can't do it yet. We need to get that out of the way. So students should receive their grades on what they can do with the proper scaffolds in place. D's and F's should be based on not doing what they're expected with the proper scaffolding. So if they didn't finish their assignments with the modified instruction, then that would be a reason to get a poor grade. If they didn't turn their assignments in, or if they're not making progress, those are reasons to receive a failing grade. But just because they don't have a language, we don't fail them. And their report card should reflect grades based on what they did, as I said a while ago, even with modifications. So we set goals for them, and whether they achieve them or not is what we base grading upon. Also, we should expect classroom teachers to modify their instructions, their assignments, and their tests based on the student's language proficiency. And the use of accommodations and modifications doesn't indicate that they can't receive the highest grade, as I said a while ago. They can still get that A based on their modifications and scaffolds. That's fine. Testing accommodations should also be given to English learners for every classroom assessment that they take. So if you're going, you don't wait till the end of the year when you're taking the big test to start using accommodations. They should be something you start early in the year so the student's comfortable with them and they're accustomed to using them, so that when the time comes for them to take the big test, that they know what they're doing and how they can work with them. And hopefully, if we start early, we can wean some of those accommodations away by the time we take the big assessments at the end of the year. Also important is that the EL teacher and the classroom teacher keep in constant communication on the needs and expectations for English learners. And then some of the principles and tenets that are involved in assessment and grading for students. Teachers have to be ethical. They can't just knowingly falsify a score. Again, as I said, you don't just give them an A because you think that's how they did this week. It needs to be based on an accurate reporting of the student's performance. And the regular report card reports what the student is doing as they progress towards the standards and meeting the outcomes. They can't report irregular standards or anything that's not publicly declared ahead of time as these are our standards and these are what we are teaching. So it needs to reflect what's going on in the classroom. And any test format that you use that doesn't create an accurate report of the students' standards and they're approaching the standards needs to be looked at more carefully and, if necessary, changed or adjusted so that they fit the standards. So no matter what we do with the test, it still needs to reflect the standards that we're teaching. Okay, there are a few myths out there regarding report cards. One of them is that they can't identify a student's status as an exceptional learner. That's a myth, but it's usually kind of best practice. It says even on report cards, schools must carefully review whether the information is necessary. I'll read here. A student's IEP, 504, or EL status can appear on report cards, but not on transcripts. And even on report cards, you should decide whether or not it's necessary. So you can list that they're an EL on their report card, but make sure that you're doing it for a necessary reason. Okay, and then the other myth is that transcripts cannot identify the curriculum as being modified. The law actually, IDEA, actually says that you can't identify a student as qualifying for special services or accommodations. However, you can say that the curriculum was modified. or that it changed fundamentally to different grade level expectations for that student. So you can say that you change the expectation for the student, but you don't identify them as special ed. So it's kind of, again, a gray area there, but you can tell that you changed the curriculum for the student and modified the curriculum for the student. Now, next thing is, what are grades anyway? So again, I said in the state of Missouri, we allow local control to define what kind of grade scale they use. But in the end, what we're looking for is what the student learned along the path of instruction. So in each district, I could say they earned an A, but an A in one district may look completely different from an A in another district. So it has to be well defined in your district. Your expectations and your grading scale need to be posted and identifiable for parents to observe at some point if they want to know what your grades are based upon, because it is different from district to district. And we need to keep in mind the whole reason why we're grading. We're grading to provide feedback, to document progress, to guide our instructional decisions, sometimes to motivate, hopefully never to punish students, occasionally to sort students into groups, but these three at the bottom are not and should not be the purpose of grading. The ones above the line are what we look for. And then we have to also think about how do attendance, effort, and behavior go into the grade. As far as grading, those are not the student's performance per se. So you have to be very careful when giving grades what you're using those things for. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. So each teacher's evaluation process should reflect on the student's progress, their knowledge of the skill that's taught, and based on more than one indicator. So you don't just use one or two tests. It should be ongoing throughout their educational journey so that you understand what progress they're making along the way. A grade represents that valid and undiluted indicator of what the student knows and is able to do, and we call that mastery. So we document their progress and we give them feedback, and it also gives us something to share with parents. And additionally, it helps us to inform our instructional decisions. What do they need to know? What did they not learn? What do we need to spend more time on? So it helps us with those things. And a lot of our schools use standards-based assessments and grading now. So what is that? Well, it's when you are assessing and grading only in reference to the evidence of standards and nothing else. If it's listed on your course curriculum, it can be evaluated and included in the final grade. And if it's not listed in your curriculum, it shouldn't be reported in the main grading scale. It could be a separate column saying these are additional things that we're looking at, but it's not part of the formal assessment and formal grading. So a lot of times that requires removing or changing some conventional grading practices in order to maintain the grade's integrity. Again, we don't give points to students for bringing a note back and improve their grade. Or if you're there every day this week, I'm going to give you 5 extra bonus points. We can't do things like that because that is not assessing the student's progress in learning a skill. Many of you have probably seen this cartoon before, and I think this really is a good example of what an English learner sometimes is dealt in a classroom. We say, this is the test, this is what I expect everyone to do. And again, this goes against that whole Lau versus Nichols idea where he's giving everyone the same thing and he feels that that's fair, but it's not. So instead, it might look something like this. We know the monkey and the bird can easily get up the tree, but maybe we need to build a ramp for the seal, or find a balloon to carry the fish up there, stairs for the dog to climb the tree. Or perhaps we need to put in an elevator to get the monkey and the penguin up there. But no matter what we do, we are finding a way to get them where they need to be, with scaffolds or with supports of some kind. And that's the way it is with our English learners. Again, we come back to the idea that being an English learner is not a disability, but rather a temporary situation that we are giving extra instruction so that they can learn English along the way. They need time to develop the language skills to achieve in the academic tasks in English in an English-speaking classroom. And what we do as teachers makes an impact on the students' motivation and their confidence in these situations. We've heard of comprehensible input, where we help the students understand, but there's also comprehensible instruction. And that's instruction that helps the student reach the level of understanding needed to learn in the classroom. And English learners who have a very low level of English ability need a little bit more comprehensible instruction to get them to that level of understanding, those scaffolds and those accommodations. Because we all know that our English learners are not all the same. There are different stages of acquisition, and they're not all equally able to successfully manage grade level instruction without that scaffolding. And they have the right to receive grades that represent the accurate evaluation of where they are and how much they're achieving through the correct scaffolding and accommodations to help their learning. And also time is a variable in this. Nobody knows ahead of time how long it's going to take for English learners to learn anything. This is a really good video by Dr. Tay. He's a skateboard champion, a professor of physics, and he talks about how he learned to perform some of the skateboard tricks that he has accomplished over the years. And he talked about how it is likened to how we learn in schools. It's like you don't just get on a skateboard and do these tricks automatically. You fell several times, and you learn from each time that you fell to improve the next time. And so he walks you through this analogy of how he learned to do some incredible tricks, but it was in baby steps, learning the small things along the way. And he said it's kind of the same way with education. We need to remember that it takes small steps, and that we expect failure, and that's okay. It's not something that we should be punished for or look down upon, because that's part of the learning process. And that's something we also need to keep in mind and remember. And again, reflecting on what are grades. They're not compensation. They're communication. They're a report of what's happening and how we're learning. And just because it's easy to calculate a score by averaging or things like that doesn't mean that's the best way to look at our scores. For example, all of these students have an average of 70%. And if we just put that these students all earned whatever 70% is, if it's a C or a D or whatever level your grading scale would put them, that doesn't give us the best picture of that student's learning. So when it comes to reporting how our students are doing, we need to break it apart into components. So something even as much as giving this visual would be helpful for understanding where the students are. So for example, this student B, doesn't understand fiction very well, but they love nonfiction. And their writing skills are kind of iffy. but they're doing okay with speaking and not too bad with listening, but they're soaring in nonfiction. So figure out what it is that makes that skill so much better for them and apply that to some of the other areas. We have to look at the whole picture, not just the whole picture, but all the parts that make up the whole picture. So I thought that was very interesting when you consider all of these students average to a 70 and what that looks like. Also with averaging, we know that averaging changes over time, and it's based on how students are doing in relation to each other. But in our schoolrooms, we're looking at criterion reference and standard-based grading. So how can averaging play into that? It was invented to get rid of the influence of one sample error in an experimental design. And it's not really designed for showing progress of students over time. So we need to keep that in mind. So also, you can look at it in this respect. If this quarter you were teaching math and you taught all of these skills, and in all of those areas the student got a B, what does this mark tell us about the proficiency in each of those areas? So breaking it down and reporting upon each area is a much better indicator of how the student's progressing. And I like this quote from Benjamin Franklin, going way back in time, it's 1750. He says, "Tim was so learned, he could name a horse in 9 languages, but so ignorant that he brought a cow to ride on, So he understands how to say cow, but he has no idea what a cow actually is, or a horse actually is, I'm sorry. And he knows how to say a horse. He knows what that horse is, but he has no idea what a horse is. But Benjamin Franklin got it as well. So one of I like this too, and I saw this in my own children. My children are old now, so in 2013, they were playing video games, and I saw a big change in them on their way of thinking and their way of approaching things. This article said that in 2013, the students grew up playing video games, and they got that immediate feedback, because if they didn't win, or if they weren't doing the best they could and strategic, then they could die in the game. So each time they played, they got feedback on how they could play better. And I know my kids were always trying to get those cheat codes and finding out how they could play a better game. So that feedback improved their performance each time they played the game. So I know we started gamifying some of the things in the classroom because of the whole video game era. But providing that immediate feedback is what it boiled down to. They were getting information on how they could improve every time they played. So feedback is like holding up that mirror to the students and showing them what they did and compared to what they could have or should have done. There's no evaluative component. So they're just looking at where they are now and what they could do to improve, or how they've improved from the time before. And assessments when we're gathering that information so we can make a decision and do something differently. But feedback's immediate. And research has found that the greatest impact on a student's success is formative feedback. We can learn without giving students grades, but we can't learn without descriptive feedback that tells us what we did wrong and how to correct it. And then from Marzano, they did a study that they looked at the effects of feedback and information that they give to students when they're doing assessments. And they found that just telling the students what number they had correct and incorrect had negative influence. But when they talked about the criteria and what was expected, that increased their scores by 16 percentile points. And then when they provided an explanation as to why they were correct or incorrect, that increased 20 percentile points. And then when they asked the students to keep responding until they had correctly answered the question. That increased by 20 percentile points. But then when they gave them a chart that graphically portrayed their achievement, that increased their score by 26 percentile points. So again, that goes back and tells you that feedback is important, and it does make a difference on how students learn. So we need to give students multiple opportunities to demonstrate achievement, give them that feedback, formative assessments, weekly quizzes, projects, whatever, for that weekly assessment before we give them the summative assessment. That is the end product of everything they've learned. Also, something that comes up a lot is homework. And there are two extremes that we can focus our thinking upon. If a student doesn't do any homework and earns an A, the top grade on every assessment, should that student get an A on his report card, even though he didn't do the homework? Depends. What is it that we have to think again? What are we looking for? Are we looking for whether the student can do the work? It's hard. That's a hard decision. But then on the other end, if a student does all of the homework and does a great job on their homework every day, but bombs an assessment because they're not a test taker, isn't that also a flag we need to look at? So we've got both ends. Some students can just learn by listening and participating in class and then do great on the test, or learning on their own without doing the assignments, and then some of them do the assignments. So we need to take things like that into consideration as well when we're talking about what grades we should give students and make those decisions along the way. So we mark and grade against standards and outcomes, not the routes that the students take or the techniques that the teachers use to achieve those standards and outcomes. So what we're looking for is, are the students learning what we're teaching? So this goes back to that, giving them points for the neatness in their handwriting, or participating in the group discussion, or maybe even their homework or classwork, or keeping a log. Are those things really grading what we want to be looking for in the students, whether or not they're achieving and understanding the information we've provided them? Something else to think about. There is an activity that's called here's what, so what, now what, that we used a lot when I was in the classroom as a protocol for using data and feedback. So we said, here's what you did. Here's how your assessment came out. These are the things that I saw you doing. So what are we going to do with this information? What have we learned from this? How can we use this to get better? And then now what's our next step? What are we planning? Okay, so that's just one protocol that we can use for evaluation and grading. And then you grade on that last, now what, their performance after that. And then redoing assignments is also one thing that was a touchy subject. When we don't allow students to resubmit and redo an assignment, this is what we're saying to them. We're saying that was not really a legitimate educational, there was no value to that assignment. It wasn't that important. Or it's okay if you don't do the work. Or it's okay if you didn't learn that activity, we're just going to move along. So when we don't expect them to do the work, that's kind of what we're telling them. None of that should be acceptable to an educator. If we don't allow the students to redo the work, then we're denying them that ability to learn and to mature as students. So here are some practices to avoid in a differentiated classroom. Penalizing students for multiple attempts is one. Grading practices such as daily homework. So grading their practice every day, their homework every day, and using that as part of the end grade is not considered a best practice. Withholding assistance, not giving them help when they need it, but providing that scaffolding or that differentiation. Giving a group grade does not tell you how a specific student is doing. Incorporating non-academic factors like behavior, attendance, and effort into how a student is progressing. Assessing in ways that don't indicate students' mastery. Those do not help with grading. Grading on a curve does not give us a clear picture of where the student is. Providing extra credit does not tell us where the student is learning that specific skill. Defining supposedly criterion-based grades in terms of norm referenced, averaging, and recording zeros on a 100-point scale for work that's not done does not really tell us what the student has and hasn't learned. So things to consider. So late work, that was a question too that I got a lot in the classroom. Teachers would say, well, they didn't hand in their work. And a lot of them would say, you know, it's late, I'm only going to give you half credit. That moves the student down a whole letter grade, and it defeats them before they actually do the work. But maybe taking off 2 points for each day that it's late is more instructive, and it gives them hope. And work actually sometimes works like that in the real world. But when you look at late work, you have to ask, is it chronic or is it occasional? And how we react to it or respond to it is different depending on which it is, and how we intervene. There are 3 approaches that have been identified as effective. There's the adjusted curriculum approach, where we grade students against their own progress, but indicate what grade, that the grade reflects an adjusted curriculum. Or there is the progression and standards approach, where we grade students with 2 grades, one that indicates their performance with the standards, and another that indicates their own progress of how they've improved over time. That's kind of how Missouri's grading scale has moved to overall. And then multiple categories within subjects approach, where you divide the grade into its component pieces. And that's kind of what we're doing with literacy right now, where you look at each section and you look at how they're doing in all of those sub areas in order to get an overall picture. And that could look something like this, where you have the different standards and you look at how they're progressing so that you have a better picture of what needs the student has and what things you need to approach differently. This is a sample grading report for newcomers. Again, this came from something that I used in the classroom. So you identify whether the student was a newcomer or an immigrant, all the different areas, and then whether it was always met, sometimes met, and never met. And if you answer always and sometimes to all of these, your student would receive a passing grade. But if they never met, that's something that you need to investigate further and find out why they're not meeting those skills. Then after they are no longer a newcomer, they can progress through these stages. We all know that there's emerging, developing, expanding, and bridging. And this just gives some of the information that you could share with a classroom teacher at each of these levels. These are some of the things that the student should be expected to do and base their evaluation on those things as well. And in the content area, these are just some ways that content area teachers can use specific teaching methods to help advance proficiency for their student. Inclusion, use of visuals, the SIOP method, small group instruction, and group work to help them to get that understanding and comprehension that they need in order to progress. This is something that came from Escort and WIDA. They put together students at a 2.5 to 4.7 R range for proficiency. These students are still English language learners. So anyone within that range, we don't put them in the classroom and forget about them. They're still English language learners, and they still need some accommodations as far as being successful in the classroom. Beyond a 4.7 to a 6.0, they should have already exited the program. They're being monitored for 2 years. And during this time, students given standard grades for work that's comparable to his or her peers. So this kind of gives you that breakdown. Before a 4.7, they can still have accommodations, and they can still have things that to help them and scaffold them with their learning. And we can't forget that. And then this, I don't remember who this was from, Standards-Based Instruction for English Language Learners. And it gives you English language development and standard-based grading for ELs in the content area. So this is giving you some idea of how to do standards-based grading in content areas. The yellow side would be ELD, and the blue would give you an idea to use this in content-based instruction. And then this is kind of just a generalization. At the beginning and low intermediate level in elementary, we should grade students according to their academic performance at the grade level in which they are functioning, not in the grade level that they're placed. So if they're brand new to the United States or they have never been in school before, we need to take that into consideration when we're grading them. All right. If they're at high or proficient level of English proficiency, then they should probably fit into what most classroom instruction provides to them. It should be comprehensible, and they should be graded according to the same standards as the mainstream students. So once they start developing their comprehension at a high intermediate proficiency level, we can use the same scales as everyone else. Then with middle school, a lot depends on putting them into the correct courses. It should match the requirement and ability to the extent the students can be successful. So those can-dos. Content mastery of the standards and benchmarks of the course should be the basis for evaluation. So are they meeting the expectations for the class? Effort and conduct grades should not be factored into their grade, as we said earlier. And then students should be evaluated according to the mastery of their skills and the concepts and acquiring knowledge. And EL should be provided with strategies to help make it comprehensible so that they can be successful. Then when they get to high school, again, it's based on mastery of the subject and the concepts and the knowledge. We have to make sure we put them in the correct courses that they are able to be successful in. Accommodations using strategies help to facilitate their successful participation in the general education curriculum. And grades should be consistent with mastery of course objectives. So we don't dumb down the class. We don't make it easier for them. We have the same expectations, the same rigor. We just need to provide the scaffolds and accommodations so that they can actively participate in the class. So high school teachers may get their grades from a variety of resources, like end of course exams, formative assessments, teacher-made tests, follow-up activities, some observations, projects, or summative assessments. They can use any and all of these, and it may look different for different students. So one student might have a teacher-made test that is accommodating their needs. Another student might do a project, but it gets the same result and has the same rigor and the same goal in mind. So there are some techniques that we can use to help accommodate the students. Again, teacher-made tests that have a gradual progress and difficulty, that are according to the language proficiency, and students are only responsible for a portion of the test. Or we could adapt the test and include simpler sentence structure, or provide a word bank, or provide them with notes or a study guide before the test, or concentrate just on the key concepts and don't include any of that extra fluff that might be on a test. Or we can use alternative measures to assess base grades on opportunities to demonstrate achievement of the standards, a project, or an experiment, or something else. Performance may be measured through a lot of different assessments, formative assessments, assignments, and projects. Just as long as you give a rubric ahead of time and the student knows what's expected ahead of time and that it's going to be part of their grade. And in general, when we look at grading English learners, the percentage of ELs who receive failing grades should not exceed the percentage of mainstream students who receive failing grades. So when you're looking at your grades in general, if all of your ELs are failing, that says something about how the instructions are put in place, not so much about what the students. If all students are failing, both English learners and the mainstream students, then that says something about, also says something about the instruction, that something needs to change. Okay, then following this, there are some resources. Steinhaus has a really great website with some videos and testimonials and articles that you can look at. EL Educational Leadership also has, in this single issue, it was all about English learners. These are some of the authors that contributed to that. And then our friend Larry Ferlasso, grading system we have is a response to the grading system we have, and it's an opinion piece by him that gave some really thoughtful things to consider. And then there are several books that I have read or looked through on grading that I found to be really well done, especially this one, Fair Isn't Always Equal by Wormelli. I got to meet him and learn quite a bit from him, and many of the things in this presentation came from his research. And then just some more books. These were some more fairly recent, except for this alternative gradings. These are just some other articles and books that I read recently that I thought were very helpful. So anytime you have questions about grading or anything EL related, you know, we always have our male specialists that are willing to come and work with you and help you out. And I'm also available anytime. And that is all I have to share. I'm happy to talk about some questions if you like. The Steinhaus has not found. I will update it for you, Amanda, and put an updated in the note taker when I get it. I'll have to check that link for you. I am going to stop sharing my screen and give you a chance to comment if you wish to. There we go. All right. If you have any questions or anything you want to share, this is that time. Karen, if you'd like, I'll stay on afterwards and you can ask a question about cell biology.
I don't really have a question about grading, but I was just wondering, I saw Drew's email that came out about a week or two ago that he would be leaving and you'll be our
Yeah, he's gone.
Well, that's a loss for all of everybody. He's been
Yeah,
great.
I cried.
Well,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
any
Any
updates
questions?
for that?
They have had several really good candidates. So we do have some people that we are interviewing. I don't know how knowledgeable they are about WIDA assessment at this point, but they have a background in assessment. And as Drew shared, if you have any really in-depth questions, the best practice would be to call that DRC or WIDA helpline. They're wonderful, and that's what they're there for. And they've heard all the questions, so they usually have a real quick answer for you. If it's Missouri, if it's Missouri specific, you can call me and I can get the answer for you.
How did I not get that email?
About Drew?
Yes.
I don't know. He sent it out over the listserv.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
okay. Maybe that's why.
Either. I was wondering the same thing, how to get on that listserv.
I mean, I'm on the listserv. That's so weird.
He included it kind of at the end of his last mailing. He was trying to be real sneaky and quiet about it.
I mean, I knew he was looking. And do you know, did he say where he was going?
Yes, he's going to be working for WIDA.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
So he told me about that interview at Federal Programs and I was excited for him. And then I was worried he didn't get the job because I hadn't heard anything.
Yeah.
So
he applied for a job before and didn't get that one. This is a second job he applied for, and it's more data, working with data. But he can't work with Missouri for a year because he's from here, and that would be unethical, I guess.
So do we get to go rogue and extend the access window now?
No. No, unfortunately not. If we extend the window, we get the results back much later. So, you know.
I mean, if we spend any more winter days, I mean.
Yeah. Well, he already built it. He had this discussion with me before he left. He says, now don't let them talk you into this. He goes, because I already padded it with all of these days on the end. You tell them to get it done now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he had, yeah, we're doing it. I mean, I'm testing every second I can, but
yeah,
gosh.
Yeah, I know. It's hard.
So no, now you're Drew, Sean, you're everybody. We always knew you were everything, Cammie, so.
Yeah, right. I saw that Lynn shared something about instruction and grading for ELs that they have. That would be wonderful if you wouldn't mind sharing that with me too. Having resources like that for the state. And in the, if you've looked at the LinkedIn page that I made for our state, since they shut down, what was the other one we were using that went out of existence? Anyway, whatever that was, when they shut it down, I took all of the information that we had gathered and moved it over to the LinkedIn page. So we can add resources in there as well that are available to everyone. And those are linked in my signature line on anything that I send out from Jesse.
So our form, it lets EL teachers give general scaffolds in the various categories like visual, social, etc. And then at the bottom, there's a policy statement. If you have not provided appropriate scaffolding and partnered with your EL specialist, you cannot fail the student.
That's wonderful. Yes. Well, and I always said, you know, if our students are failing and you haven't provided that for them, it's actually the teacher that's failing. It's not the student.
Yes. Cami, I have another question for you. I saw something that came out about praxis scores for EL certification. What does that mean?
It's not replacing it. It's not a test where you could just take a test.
Okay.
It's more to make sure that you have acquired the necessary skills. So you still have to go through all the coursework, is my understanding.
So you can't learn the skills on your own through PD, like your district offering it.
Not at this point that
Okay.
that's not how I'm understanding it at this point. You still have to complete coursework, but it's like a end of course test for
Okay.
the coursework that you've taken. I have an appointment actually to speak to certification, to go over, you know, when we had that work group and they kind of dropped the ball when COVID hit and everything and haven't really gotten back to it. So we're supposed to bring up those conversations again to look at changing the rules for certification, but it's not just something you could say we're going to do it and talk to a couple of people and get it done. It is something you have to go through a process of approval and it has to go through committees. So
right.
We've already started the legwork, and I think just getting back to it and presenting it might help, because right now we're one of the few states that require as many hours as we do, which is also why we lose a lot of our EL teachers to other states, because our teachers are better trained and more qualified to teach English language learners. So darned if we do and darned if we don't, you know. But that's a part of the reason we don't want to do just an assessment. We want to make sure that they have the proper training and we have qualified teachers.
Understand.
But again, we don't have enough qualified teachers. So what do we do? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And in OCR stuff that has come out, has there been any guidance about ratios? I found one case in North Carolina that said a building with 75 students needs 2 teachers, of which 1 must be full-time. That is the only thing out of 15 cases I could find.
Yes. Well, every time we get together at CCSSO, you know, Chief School Council from all the different states, and we have our convening, that's one of the topics that almost invariably comes up every time. Everyone's asking, what are you doing to fill your quota of teachers? I mean, do you have enough teachers? And nobody does. And the answer is at this point, Lynn. But different states do have different requirements of certification and ratio student to teacher. I'm working with our MSIP team that's putting together the next MSIP 7. And they promised me that they would put those ratios back in there of teacher to student for ELs, because it was not included in the last one. So they promised me that we'll get something together for that for the next iteration, but it got left out of this one. We're also, since I'm talking about MSIP, we're also working on revamping those scales. Before Drew left, Drew has been working on looking at over the past, I don't know, 7-8 years, the scores and how we can utilize those to create new scales that would be appropriate for this place we are in time. And we think we have a good idea of how we're going to do it. I don't know if you know Jeremy Ellis, he's over NAPE at the department. He's taking over that, and he's going to be working with me on creating those new scales. One thing that we said, I don't know if you all remember from our state ESSA plan, we had a projected from 2015 to 2022. And from year to year, it got progressively higher. And I said, that is not at all how ESL works. I don't know who developed this skill, but that's not how it works. And so we had a big discussion with the data person that helps put all of that together. And she's going to work with me next month. She's real busy right now doing what all of the state assessment and programming and all of that. But anyway, she said next month she will work with me, and we will work on setting that new scale and determining what needs to be used to create that scale, because our students aren't going to get progressively higher from year to year over a period of 6 years. They used the model they use with mainstream students to create that. It's like that's not realistic. So
when do the new standards get implemented in Access? Is that next year?
2025, I think, is what they're saying right now.
So does that affect all of the data from Access 2.0?
Well, and that was
used?
And that was a question that we had as well, and kind of why it hasn't been pushed so stringently about getting this done for right now, because it may all change when that happens.
Tammy, for those students that are seniors taking Access who want the seal of biliteracy, or at least
Yes.
try for the seal of biliteracy, what
Yes.
can we do for them about scores? Because this year's score would be what they would be depending on.
So as far as the Access score, well, this is what I've done with other districts from other areas. They have gone ahead, and if you think the student is going to score, kind of tentatively give them the recognition, and then they formally recognize them at like the school board in the summer, and then officially put it on their transcript at that time. So you can say something like, this student is working towards the seal of biliteracy, and we anticipating the receipt, but then formally recognize them at the school board meeting and put it on their transcript at that time after the scores come in, which should be hopefully the end of May. But there are several districts like language other than English assessment scores don't come in until late in May after graduation, and they just hold off and recognize the students at a school board meeting in the summer.
Okay, thank you. I like that answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I might as well go ahead and
I was gonna say, go ahead.
my question about biliteracy.
Go ahead.
We have enough people to respond.
Sure.
What we're hitting up against is we can get AP tests on all of the French, German, Latin, even Chinese. We cannot find the tests that are local enough for our students to take for Arabic, for Urdu, for Turkish. And a few other in there that may be coming up in the next year or two. And so they've asked me to see if we can find other schools that might host our students, or if they have sites in St. Louis, Kansas City, or Jefferson City, Columbia.
For some of those languages, I know there are other assessments I can steer you towards.
Thank you.
Just send me a list of what you need, and I'll see what I can find for you.
Okay, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries.
Well, we appreciate everything you do, Cammie, honestly.
Well,
Yeah, thank you, Cammie.
I appreciate all of you. I mean, your input is really helpful, and knowing what you need and what I can do to help you helps me know where to move forward. Keep your head up. I appreciate you.
I wanted to add in that, Cammie, that all the questions I have been asking you, you have been so quick to send me the link or from somewhere to find the answer for all my questions.
I try. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Well, my friends, if there's nothing else, we'll call it a night. I appreciate you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Tammy. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Tammy.